It requires the FAA to revise the order which provides them authority to destroy this data, and the revision would prohibit such destruction. And it makes the documentation to be preserved under this Act available to the public upon a Freedom of Information Act request, subject to a prohibition on using the documents for commercial purposes. I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment and reserve the balance of my time.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I do.
Yes, we've reviewed the amendment and are supportive of it. People are concerned about vintage airplanes. I know EAA that I represent, one of the largest, if not largest, association of general aviation enthusiasts, feels this is very important. We would like to work with you to perfect the amendment, but my understanding is that the FAA and others also support its intent.
Yes. Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Mr. Chairman, I will only agree to this amendment if Mr. Graves agrees that this is his last amendment on this legislation. Now, I know he is the chairman of the Small Business Committee. I know he's been an active member on the Transportation Committee. I know he's a pilot. But no one should be allowed as many amendments as he has. And unless he agrees that this is absolutely his last amendment, I would have to oppose it.
Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my time, in response to that, I can guarantee that this is my last amendment for this particular bill, at least.
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield.
The chairman and I finally found something we agree upon. I agree as well.
I would close with that, Mr. Chairman, and yield back the balance of my time, urge my colleagues to support it.
Gentleman yields back. Does any member seek time in opposition? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Graves. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 27, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 27, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Pierce of New Mexico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, and a member opposed, each will have 5 minutes. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce.
Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
This amendment is at the request of the local county, Doña Ana County, New Mexico. They have land which alternates with a private investor, and they're simply asking that 7.35 acres be given to them, and they would in turn give up 8.41 acres to this private company. And then the private company would also give a road to the airport that they're desiring. This land swap is by mutual agreement of all parties concerned. The FAA has no objections to the transaction. The appraised value is somewhat different, but the developing group is offering to pay for a road in the equal amount to where the two amounts would be equal, so there's no effective difference. And I would confirm to the chairman of the committee that this is my last amendment also, if that's what it takes to get people to agree to it. And so with that, I would yield.
Yeah, we've reviewed your amendment and feel that it is a reasonable and important amendment and support it. Urge a yes vote on your amendment.
And Mr. Chairman, I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentleman from West Virginia rise?
Claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I'd like to ask the sponsor of the amendment. First, I want to read through the rules of the House, and what I understand is a congressional earmark. Under Clause 9 of Rule 21, a congressional earmark is defined as a provision included at the request of a member authorizing or recommending spending authority for an entity or targeted to a specific locality or congressional district. The amendment before us qualifies as a congressional earmark. The gentleman from New Mexico is specifically requesting the provision. In addition, the amendment authorizes spending authority for Dona Ana County, New Mexico. Subsection B2 states, and I quote, "Any amount received by the county for the conveyance, which clearly, end quote, which clearly contemplates the county receiving funding pursuant to this provision." Therefore, the amendment qualifies as a congressional earmark under Clause 9 or Rule 21. Moreover, under Clause 17 of Rule 22 of the Rules of the House regarding members' code of conduct, a member who requests a congressional earmark must provide a written statement to the chair and ranking member certifying that neither the member nor a spouse has a financial interest in the earmark. I don't question that at all here, but I'm just saying what the rules are. Mr. Chairman, I understand that the rule weighs all points of order against the amendment. However, is there any way to ensure that the gentleman from New Mexico files the appropriate financial disclosure certification with the Committee on T&I required under Clause 17 of Rule 22? These disclosure requirements were included in the House rules in the 110th Congress under the Democratic majority. They've served the House well, and I'd like to ensure merely what I'm trying to do here is ensure that the sunshine provisions continue to be the standard of the House. I yield.
Yes, sir. Actually, since there's no money actually changing hands, there's not any value changing hands, it appears that the rule that the gentleman refers to is not invoked. I'm reading Clause 9, Section E, which says, for purposes of this clause, the term congressional earmark means a provisional report language included primarily at the request of a member providing, authorizing, recommending a specific amount of discretionary budget authority, which this does not do, credit authority, which this does not do, or other spending authority, which this does not do, for a contract, which this does not do, a loan, which this does not do, loan guarantee, which this does not do, grant, which this does not do, loan authority, which this does not do, or the expenditure with note with or to an entity or targeted to a specific state, locality, or congressional district.
Reclaiming my time, the gentleman's last sentence of his amendment says, any amount received by the county for the conveyance shall be used by the county for the development, improvement, operation, or maintenance of the airport. So it does seem there's some transfer of value here, or some monetary, if not monetary, there's some value of some sort that's being conveyed to the county.
If I could yield myself time or claim time, the amounts...
I would yield back on my time.
The amounts that are involved are equivalent. There is no difference. So I think that's just clearing language in the bill. It's not like any value is moving either direction or the other. That has been ascertained by the appraisals, and there is an equivalent difference in land, but then the company who is giving up land at the request of the local county has agreed to pave a road on the airport for the county that would make up the difference, and that value has been ascertained also to be in the amount of about $143,830 in order to make the two transactions
Reclaiming my time, what is the value the federal government's getting here?
There is, in our view, there is no value lost or gained either direction.
Except toward the county.
No, there's no loss to the county, no loss or no gain to the county. There are 7 acres that are in triangular shapes up against the county. They're not able to do anything with the airport on that side. They're simply asking that these triangular shapes be exchanged out so that there is a strip of land that they can develop. There is no difference in value to either the county or to the company.
Reclaiming my time, I raise these questions, Mr. Chairman, because, you know, what looks like an earmark, walks like an earmark, smells like an earmark, must be an earmark. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate the points that the ranking member has brought up, and of course I share his concern in deep disregard for earmarks. We would never do anything which either compromised his values concerning earmarks nor mine. We feel like that the entire transaction is transparent. It's one which was requested by the local county at the expense of the local community, or at the local company. And so, to me, the Rules Committee has said that this amendment would be made in order, that it did not offend any provision of the rules of this House, nor did it offend any of the germaneness regarding the underlying bill. So we gladly pursue this and would request a yes vote for Amendment number 13 to H.R. 658. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I ask yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays have been requested. You request a recorded vote? Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 28, printed in House Report 112-46. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 29, printed in House Report 112-46. For purposes, the gentleman from California rise.
I have an amendment to desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 29, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Schiff of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of the amendment that I'm offering along with my Southern California colleagues, Mr. Sherman and Mr. Berman. This amendment would allow airports that meet specific requirements, airports that already had at least a partial curfew in effect before the 1990 Airport Noise and Control Act, ANCA, to implement mandatory nighttime curfews. The amendment defines a nighttime curfew as between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. and affects only 2 small airports that had partial curfews or a full curfew in the case of Bob Hope before the passage of ANCA. It is not intended to open the door to any further exemptions from ANCA. When Congress enacted ANCA, it intended for the statute to permit airports to obtain noise restrictions if they met certain requirements. At the time, Congress exempted several airports from the law's requirements for FAA approval of new noise rules if they had pre-existing noise rules in effect to address local noise problems. Both airports in Southern California that would be affected by this amendment have a long history of curfews and were unfortunately left out of the grandfather provision of ANCA. Our amendment would correct this inequity and put those airports on the same footing as other airports that had curfews before ANCA's passage. One of the airports affected, Bob Hope Airport, was one of the first airports in the country to impose a curfew. The Van Nuys Airport also had a partial curfew prior to ANCA. The amendment therefore corrects the omission of not providing curfews to these airports since they already had a full or partial curfew in effect before 1990. This amendment is supported by the local airports themselves and has the full support of the local congressional delegation. Opponents of the amendment contend there is already an established process to consider a community's request for a curfew. However, the process was designed to be so difficult that in the decades since it was established by the FAA, only one airport in the nation has successfully completed an application, Bob Hope Airport, and then it was summarily turned down. After spending $7 million and 9 years of effort, the FAA rejected Bob Hope's request, erroneously contending that the small number of flights impacted by the curfew would impose too great a strain on the country's aviation system and too great a cost on users. In reality, the FAA approached this process in reverse, beginning with a conclusion at which to reach and working backwards to try and justify its result. It's also important to note that my colleagues understand this amendment will have the impact this amendment will have on aviation in Southern California. There'll be no impact on commercial flights. Commercial airlines do not operate out of Van Nuys, and commercial airlines already abide by a voluntary nighttime curfew at Bob Hope Airport. The impact on general aviation will be very limited. About 9 flights each night are expected to be affected.
Because of the FAA's dismissive attitude toward legitimate local concerns, it is clear to us that the only way to provide relief to the residents in our community is through legislative action. For this reason, Mr. Chairman, I strongly urge my colleagues to support this amendment. It will correct an omission in the Airport Noise Control Act. Local problems require local solutions, not solutions imposed by a federal agency with a predetermined agenda. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, I've done my best to meet with some of the affected parties here, and I have the greatest respect for those who have brought this proposal forward. Talked to Mr. Schiff, Mr. Berman, and others. They have a good intention. They want to protect the airports, the constituents that they represent. However, what they propose is, and again, I had to look at this very carefully to see the consequences of what they propose and how it would affect all of us. Prior to 1990, and I think that's where he wants to take us back to, we didn't have a regulation for sort of a standard airport noise and control federal law. Congress enacted a law, and they did this because we get into the situation of any airport could impose various flight restrictions, and what you do is start closing down a national system because, again, you have no consistent regulation. And we set up a procedure in that law. Now, it is true that Bob Hope was, had applied, spent money, and then was denied. Van Nuys has never applied, and Bob Hope can go back and apply. But if we open this up and we start taking airport by airport and granting certain levels of activity and time, we start destroying a national aviation system. So that's why we put the Act in place. It has a manner in which to proceed. Now, maybe, and you know, I'm glad this came up, because maybe it is an act that we need to look at to, I don't want communities to have to spend a great deal of money to go through this process or spend a great deal of time. Maybe we need to look at amending the Airport Noise Control Act of 1990 to be fair to communities. But I'm telling you, if we open this door, then we have a problem. And if there wasn't a remedy, now again, Van Nuys has never even sought the remedy. So to come to Congress and ask for this exemption at this point on behalf of the entire aviation system, and my responsibility to, again, everyone who contributes to our national aviation system, I can't concur with, and I have to oppose this amendment at this time. Reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the chairman and appreciate the time that he spent to discuss this issue with us. I would just make a couple points before I yield to my colleague, and that is this will only restore an inequity at the time of ANCA. Had ANCA exempted each of the airports that had a curfew in place at the time, we wouldn't be here because this problem would have been taken care of. So it doesn't really create a precedent that will erode the system, destroy the system. What it will say is that all airports that had a curfew in place should be treated the same way. And as a further illustration of the minimal impact it will have, both airports support this, and LAX, the major airport in the area, the authority that controls LAX, also supports this. So the other major airport that would be impacted by any potential overflow supports this as well. There's a uniformity within the airports in our region. And with that, I yield a minute and a half to my colleague, Mr. Sherman.
Gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
I yield the remaining time.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
I represent both airports in question. This is a principled amendment that deals with all airports that had curfews in effect in 1990. To say that Burbank should appeal, having spent $9 million on a dead-end rig process, is not a sufficient answer. And to say that Van Nuys should then go spend $9 million on a process that's obviously rigged is not an answer. The answer is to adopt this amendment that doesn't cost the federal government a penny and simply allows the L.A. area to do what every stakeholder in the area wants to do. The harsh hand of the federal government should not prevent local control in this area.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman's recognized.
I'd like to inquire as to the amount of time remaining.
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you, and I yield myself the balance of the time. Again, I try to work with members that have problems. Unfortunately, again, in analyzing this, I do have the stewardship of the country at stake in our national aviation system, and this amendment, unfortunately, would set a precedent that would encourage other localities to seek congressional intervention to override FAA decisions or to avoid the agency process, review process altogether. We could be here all the time doing this. The results would be a patchwork quilt of local regulations that would work against the maintenance of a national air transportation system. We can start taking it apart piece by piece. And that was exactly the concerns that led to the passage of the law in 1990. Now, if it needs amending, I'll work with them. I understand their concerns and others that might have a similar problem. And it's somewhat educational, too, to learn of the $9 million that they had to spend to go through this process and then have it denied. But I can't, in good faith, and again, responsibility to the nation and its aviation system, support this amendment at this time and have to oppose it because, again, the patchwork, the quilt work, and the deluge that we would get in our committee. So, again, having concerns, but I still remain in opposition and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is now on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, I request the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays have been requested. Gentleman requests a recorded vote.
I do.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 30, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purposes does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 30, printed in House Report Number 112-46, offered by Mr. Matheson of Utah.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am very pleased to stand up and offer this bipartisan amendment today offered by myself and also Mr. Pierce from New Mexico. The amendment addresses an interesting problem, and that is, over history, at times, the federal government has given land to various airport authorities. It could be a city, a county, or a state, with a reverter clause that the land is no longer used for the purpose in which it was given or sold to that airport. Now, I'm not suggesting we ignore the reverter clause, but there are circumstances where a different airport-related use is proposed for this land, but it can't be done under the original terms of the sale. So our amendment basically says that as long as this land is continued to use for airport purposes, the reverter clause, the FAA has the ability to ignore the reverter clause, if you will, or adjust the reverter clause to allow this land to continue to be used for airport purposes in a different manner than was used before. This circumstance exists in various locations around the country. This is an issue that has been hanging out for a few years in some of our congressional districts, and I'm pleased we found a way, I believe, to address this where for these what I believe are non-controversial issues of changing to a different type of airport use, so I think it's consistent with the intent of the land being given to a city, county, or state or airport authority. This remains in the public hands. That is the substance of my amendment. Mr. Chairman, I urge people to vote for it, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Would the gentleman yield?
Gentleman yield.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll yield to Mr. Petre, yes.
Thank you. We have reviewed this amendment. We support the goal that he's attempting to achieve. We want to continue working with him, but even with it being adopted, because the FAA has raised some concerns, mainly that it, as drafted, would capture all airports and would have an overly broad effect. I understand the difficulty that created that.
Yes.
So we're trying to figure out if there's some way we can achieve the objective, which, as best we can tell, is a perfectly reasonable, sensible objective within the rules of the House and without causing problems in other places that are unintended.
Well,
and with those caveats, we support the amendment and look forward to working with you as we go forward.
Well, I greatly appreciate the comments of my colleague, Mr. Petri, and I also commit to continue to work with you to refine this to make it in the best possible form. I'll reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico rise?
Well, if the gentleman would yield, would the gentleman yield?
Instead of claiming to you, I'll yield to you.
Bet,
I'll yield to Mr.
thank you.
Pierce.
I was going to claim time in opposition and then speak in favor of the amendment, and we can get this wrapped up a lot quicker if we do it this way. Basically, I'm co-sponsoring the amendment with the gentleman. In the West, we have the problem is greater, more extensive than the rest of the country, but we've got small parcels of land around everywhere that are owned by the government, and this is a practical, common sense measure which would help distribute those parcels of land. It requires that the value be accorded to the government, to whatever owning agency there is. You have to receive fair market value for it, but it gets it out of the government hands and into the hands of either an entity that will develop the land or hold it. And so it's a common sense amendment that makes for smoother operations downstream, and would gladly support the amendment and urge a yes vote for the Matheson-Pierce amendment.
And if no one's going to claim time on that side, I'm happy to close and just suggest that, again, I appreciate Mr. Pierce's work on this, and I appreciate Mr. Petri's ongoing discussions with this. It's been a really good bipartisan effort. I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. I'll yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is now on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 31, printed in House Report 112-46. I'm sorry, for what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise as the designee of the gentlewoman from California, Representative Waters, and I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 31, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Mr. Schiff of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
Earlier this afternoon, we discussed this amendment with the principal author, your colleague, Ms. Waters. We're prepared to accept the amendment. We know it was offered in good faith and is a more restrictive amendment than an earlier one that we discussed, and so I would urge a yes vote on her amendment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for that, and I know my colleague, Representative Waters, thanks you for that. And let me just briefly state for the record a couple of points that my colleague would like me to make, and then I'm happy to yield the balance of my time. This amendment states that it's the sense of Congress that the Los Angeles World Airports, the operator of the LA International Airport, LAX, should consult on a regular basis with representatives of the community surrounding LAX regarding airport operations and plans to expand, modify, or realign airport facilities. LAX, one of the world's busiest airports, is located in Representative Waters' congressional district. According to LAWA's website, LAX is the 6th busiest airport in the world for passengers and ranks 13th in the world for air cargo tonnage handled. There were 656,000 takeoffs and landings at LAX in 2006. Unfortunately, each of these takeoffs and landings makes noise. LAWA is currently in the process of realigning the runways on the north side of the airport. Depending upon the runway configuration that is chosen, this realignment could have a tremendous impact on the local community. Residents of Westchester and Playa del Rey, which are located adjacent to the north runways, are strongly opposed to any proposal to move the runways further north, which could force some families to leave their homes. Residents of the city of Inglewood and the communities of Vermont Knolls and South Los Angeles, which lie to the east of the LAX underneath the flight path of the planes that use the runways, are concerned that reconfiguration will result in an increase of airport noise. Some of the people who are most impacted by LAX operations do not even benefit from the services that LAX is intended to provide. LAX serves people from all across Southern California, but many of the people closest to the airport are low income who cannot afford the benefits of air travel. In communities like Los Angeles, where airports are located near residents who can't afford to use them, it is all the more important that airport operators listen to the concerns of those residents. This is a simple, non-binding amendment that will not affect other airports, and I thank the Chairman for his support and urge my colleagues to support this as well. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Does any member seek time in opposition? Seeing none, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 32, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purposes does the gentlewoman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 32, printed in House Report number 112-46, offered by Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
Pursuant to House Resolution 189, the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, and a member opposed, each will be recognized for 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. This amendment encourages the development of aerotropolis transportation zones. Let me start out by congratulating and thanking the committee for including the Cohen amendment in the underlying bill that would direct the FAA to adopt policies that encourage the development of aerotropolis transportation zones. I mean, no airport exists in isolation. There are cases where targeted investments in the transportation system, the intermodal transportation system, would significantly benefit the airport and make it more profitable. And all other users would need to think about how to do that in the future and make these airports the hub of their activities. I so appreciate Mr. Cohen's leadership on this and recognize the value that his new way of looking at our nation's airports and the value that that brings to us. My amendment goes one step further by giving the administration explicit authority to participate in helping to fund aerotropolis projects that he finds would significantly benefit the participating airport. It builds on Mr. Cohen's efforts by making it clear that the administrator can authorize demonstrations projects, but only if an airport authority makes a convincing case that it has a project that will result in clear benefits to the airport. Now, a little birdie told me that there will be some objection to this proposal based on the supposition that I'm arguing for a sudden shift in airport funding to be used for other transportation modes. And no, that's what I'm not trying to do. I recognize that airports have a unique need and deserve a sustainable and dedicated stream of funding. But what I am saying is that that same funding stream, that when there are times that intermodal transportation will benefit an airport, maybe bring it back to life, increase profits for it, we should look at it. I wish my colleague from Memphis, Tennessee were here. But just let me tell you a little bit about my district, Mr. Chairman. You know, I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Our airport is only 90 miles from O'Hare, a global network. The deepest part of Lake Michigan, our port, is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have lots of parcels of land available for trucking and storage. Our governor, our very popular governor, Scott Walker, who just turned down $810 million for high-speed rail, now wants $150 million to improve the Hiawatha between Chicago and Milwaukee. We're only 90 miles from O'Hare, which is overcrowded. And so I think the Aerotropolis concept could improve the profitability of that airport. I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. To what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I rise in opposition and claim time.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, while I do rise in opposition to the amendment, I do want to, first of all, thank the gentlelady from Wisconsin for bringing this amendment forward. Our committee did have an amendment which we included a provision for the gentleman from Tennessee who she's been working with, Mr. Cohen. I think they have an excellent proposal for looking at a broader scope of how aviation should work as an intermodal entity and on a larger basis. And I do have concerns about the way the language is directing certain demonstration projects and FAA funding. So we are willing to work with, again, the gentlelady who brings this amendment forward with Mr. Cohen, the gentleman from Tennessee. We did put the placeholder provision in and supportive language of, again, this type of proposal. But, again, I would have to reluctantly oppose it, but I offer to support, and if the gentlelady is willing to withdraw the amendment, she would have that commitment from me. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves.
Gentlemen, I would like to yield some time to my good friend, the ranking member, Mr. Ray Hall.
The gentlelady from Wisconsin for yielding. I do rise in support of her amendment, which would allow the FAA to conduct demonstration projects in support of aerotropolis zones around airports. These zones would encourage compatible land uses around airports. They would also facilitate transportation projects that would improve airport access and reduce congestion. These projects would not be required, but this amendment would, give the FAA that flexibility to encourage the development around our nation's airports for the benefit of the flying public and local economies. And I commend the gentlelady on her amendment.
Thank you. Reclaiming my time, I would just say I really appreciate the generous offer of the gentleman, the chair of the subcommittee, to work with me on it. I think that we can demonstrate. I think a demonstration project would have accorded us an opportunity to show you this. But I am sure that this is so profitable that many places, like in Milwaukee, will continue to work on this. And so I would be willing to withdraw this amendment at this time. If you would be willing to work with me toward improving the language and process through which this could be realized.
She reserves her time.
Does the gentleman reserve?
I reserve.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
It's, again, yielding myself time. Well, I would openly and very actively pursue the goal that the gentlelady has set here, and also the gentleman from Tennessee who provided the underlying provision that we have in the bill that will be passed. And I know that her goal is development to provide efficient, cost-effective, and sustainable intermodal connectivity to a defined region, and I share that goal. So I will work with her. Also, in closing, since this is the last amendment, I think Mr. Cawley does not intend to appear. I do want to thank the gentlelady. I want to thank the ranking member, Mr. Ray Hall. I don't see Mr. Costello. I want to thank Chairman Petri and the staff who have worked through this. There are some disagreements on some of these issues, but we have members that are willing to again come forward, state their positions. The gentlelady from Wisconsin has done that and advocated her particular provision and amendment. But I think that in all it's been a good, healthy debate and exchange opportunity to hear many, many amendments throughout the day. And I would encourage, again, working with those who have had proposals that may not have gotten in the bill, that we would work on in conference. And again, while we do have some disagreements, I think we've done probably as good a job as I can. I'd like to yield a moment to, if I may, to Mr. Ray Hall, my ranking member, Democrat leader of the committee.
I thank the chairman for yielding, and I want to second the comments he's made about the fairness on both sides of the aisle, and I think the chairman has been particularly fair and has stated willing to work with so many members on amendments, whether he has accepted them today or not. I also commend the staffs on both sides for their hard work. Mr. Petri, I commend his leadership, and Mr. Costello as well on my side of the aisle. And let's all hope this is the last time we go through this year on this bill.
Well, again, I thank the gentleman and the gentlelady, and I yield back the balance of my time, both on this amendment and hopefully on the bill.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from
And
Wisconsin.
I yield back. Thank you.
Did you have to pull
Does
the...
the gentlewoman seek unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment?
Yes.
Yes, I seek unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment. Thank you.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. It is now in order to consider amendment number 33, printed in House Report 112-46. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
I move the committee do now rise.
Questions on the motion to rise? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 658, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 658 and has come to no resolution thereon. On behalf of the majority and minority leadership, the chair announces that the official objectors for the private calendar for the 112th Congress are as follows.
For the majority, Mr. Smith of Texas, Mr. Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin, and Mr. Poe of Texas. For the minority, Mr. Serrano of New York, Mr. Nadler of New York, and Ms. Edwards of Maryland.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise?
There being no further business before the House at this time, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Questions on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. According